Retired Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer is a senior fellow at the London Centre for Policy Research, which focuses on US national security. He joins us now from Washington. Thank you very much for joining us here on TRT World. So the reasons behind starting a war in Iraq by Bush and Blair at the time was Iraqis' alleged weapons of mass destruction to justify the invasion of Iraq. Was this all fabricated?
I think it's very clear now that the Office of Special Plans within the Pentagon, led by a guy named Doug Feith, was able to take very thin threads of intelligence, which in many instances became later completely debunked, as justification of the so-called Iraqi action. I think the British had problems as well with their intelligence network, but I know specifically within the U.S. intelligence network, this information was completely false. So I think the pretext and pretense for the invasion that was related to the WMD was not there. And I think everyone now has suffered for that flaw in thinking. And look, my judgment is I was one of the planners on that invasion. I was one of the intelligence planners, and the information we had was completely wrong relating to what we would expect to find once we went in there. So I think it was very badly manipulated to get everybody to go to war.
And Tony, not only one still can't see the justification for starting a war in Iraq, but it's also a war with scandals such as Abu Ghraib and Blackwater. So has any lesson been learned from this?
Well, I'd like to believe so. I mean, look, we've we were responsible for breaking Iraq. As Colin Powell once said, if you break it, you're responsible for it. So I think that while I was not for the invasion. I believe, as I mentioned, I was one of the planners, and the basic premises were wrong. I mean, for goodness sake, we were being told we would be able to set up an embassy staff within 30 days of the invasion. I mean, that's how wacky they were. With that said, we went in, things went wrong. I'd like to believe that there's been some level of attempting an accountability. Doug Feith and company were investigated and found to be at fault. The DOD IG found that. I think more severe action needs to be taken on that. Blackwater, that issue is not yet resolved regarding what happened with them. And the issue of Barack Obama then coming in and pulling our forces out, I think that was a mistake. Requiring the Pentagon now to reestablish some level of presence and having to work with the Iraqis to re-liberate the country from Daesh, as you mentioned in the introduction. So I think the current strategy of by, with, and through, the idea of working with allies on the ground, is the way to do it. We should not be invading, using a large land army to invade foreign nations. We should be working with allies on the ground to find a way to invigorate and inform their own work to support their own security. And I think we're finally starting to learn lessons and get it right.
So has the U.S. learned from their intelligence failure then?
Well, you need to have second and third verification of sources. Look, I was one of the folks who, I'm a whistleblower for 9/11 failures. We have had a record of the intelligence community just not getting it right. And it's not so much they don't get it right, it's the political leadership of the intelligence community which manipulates the basic facts. We've seen this through a number of administrations. George Tenet did it for a number of reasons. John Brennan did it under Obama. So I think the lesson here is you need to separate out what you wish to accomplish politically from the ground truth as it is displayed factually. You need to go with the facts. And I think the lesson should be, and again, everything I can do as someone who advises folks behind the scenes here now, is you need to understand the truth and base your planning and actions based on the truth, not on some political dialectic that you wish to enforce or presume.
And Tony, I mean, last year Iraq had more terrorist attacks than any other country in the world. How was it possible in Iraq, a war on terror, to turn into a place for new terrorist groups to be formed and move so freely, like Daesh, like Al-Qaeda?
Right. Right. Well, the issue is ungoverned space. One of the lessons we've seen over and over, look, Libya. Anytime you put forth the idea of liberating a country, you need to have a clear plan of what is going to happen second and third order. We see in Afghanistan now, despite the fact we've been there for over 13 years, stability is still elusive. I think it's much more important to understand that anytime you remove any governance, whatever that governance is, whether you agree with it or not, Muammar Gaddafi was not a great guy, but he did have some level of order within the country. Same with Iraq. We did not like Saddam Hussein, but again, he had a way of managing things. We have to remember that the second order effect of removing governance is that you create conditions, a petri dish, if you will, for terror. We see that in Syria. The idea of trying to destabilize the Assad government has only resulted in that space becoming available to terrorist organizations from which they've been able to expand and launch other operations. So I think, again, we need to learn that lesson. We cannot simply decide we want to help a country become liberated and then watch the chaos ensue, which then creates terror groups which we have to deal with later.
Well, thank you so much for that insight there, Tony.